And today we're going to go over how to replace the inner workings or the guts of our Retract-A-Spare. The Retract-A-Spare is typically located in the frame rail. You may end up having to gain access through the underbelly, cutting an area out where your tire carrier is actually coming through the underbelly. In this aspect, we don't have an underbelly, so we're just going to go ahead and show you guys how to go ahead and replace this. These can also be located on the front of the A-frame on some other models and OEMs. Your first step in this process is once you've gained access, there's a bolt, 9/16 nut and a 9/16 bolt that needs to be removed. That is going to be your first step in replacing the inner workings. So with an impact, a 9/16 socket, and an open end wrench, we're going to go ahead and remove this bolt. Once you've got the nut off the bolt, go ahead and pull that bolt out. The way these work, there's two blocks in here inside the channel. One is a permanently fixed position with this bolt and the nut. The other is on the end of this worm gear rod, and it travels back and forth on there, letting the cable out and retracting the cable. That's all determined on the outside of the frame rail. There'll be a 3/4 inch hex nut, and you'll be using a manual override shaft to go ahead and lower this or raise it to get your spare tire out from underneath your trailer. So once we have this bolt and nut loose, pull the nut out, set those off to the side. At this point, this block, you should be able to wiggle it out of the tire carrier. You may end up having to loosen it up from the outside, in which case I'm going to use my drill that's clutchable. I'm going to turn it down, go to my outside nut with my 3/4 socket and lower it down. As I lower that down, it's going to push that block out. I'll have to continue lowering it to get the second block off of the worm gear on the inside of the channel there. There's your secondary block that travels back and forth on that worm gear. Once you've pulled all that out of there, you can pull this out from underneath the unit, put your new hardware, new cable in, and we can go from there as far as reinstalling it back into the channel here of the tire carrier. To go ahead and replace the inner workings of our Retract-A-Spare, we're going to need to know what model your coach is. That way we know exactly what cable to give you. We have two different lengths. Most of them use the shorter cable with the tire carrier head on it, or the tire carriage. You're going to have two blocks, one that travels up and down on the worm gear, such as this one here. It'll have a threaded area for the worm gear rod in there. And then you'll have the one that stays permanent that the cable's going to attach to. Two dowel pins are helping keep the cable in line and in route and not allowing it to pop out of those blocks. It's crucial to note that on the side of the frame rail where your override is at, that allows you to extend and retract your spare tire underneath the coach, the cable is not long enough to allow you to drop the tire and then pull the tire out to you. You'll end up having to get up underneath the unit in order to retrieve your spare tire and then pull that out from underneath the unit. It's also important to note that we ask on the side of our frame rails where that 3/4 nut is on the outside of the frame. There's a label that lets you know which direction to turn to raise it, which direction to turn to lower it, and it also lets you know that you shouldn't use a power tool and that it's 20 to 25 foot-pounds of torque. And typically what happens is an end user may cycle this down too far and over tighten it, and what it does is it ends up stripping the gear or the threads, strips the threads inside the block, and that's what allows the cable to come loose and the spare tire to drop from underneath the unit. And what we have in the past, we have a lot of dealers taking these out completely and sending them back to us and putting a brand new assembly in, which isn't really necessary. This is just a video letting you guys know that you can go ahead and just replace the guts of the tire carrier and be right back to square one, just like you had from the factory. How we're going to do this is we're going to take our 2 blocks, and we're going to set them up with the grooves where the cable runs face up at us. Take our new cable, and on the ball end there's a rounded ball area, and that's going to lock into that first block like so. Then the cable is going to route around the second block, and you may have to manipulate this a little bit to get it to go in. So when it's all set up and inside both those blocks, it should look something like that there. From there, you're going to take your dowel pins. One goes on that second block, locks into place. That allows that cable not to pop out. Your second pin goes on the front leading edge of the front block, right above where your cable end is. Lock that into place. It may be necessary to go ahead and take a small little hammer or a wrench and tap that into place. Make sure it's seated nice and tight. This one allows the cable not to come out. This one allows the cable not to jump off the area up underneath there where this cable's sliding back and forth on that front block. From this point, you're going to have to hold all this together, grabbing just up underneath where that cable ball end is, holding this all together and reinserting this complete assembly back up underneath into the tire carrier channel. From that point, we're going to grab our threaded rod from the outside, try to line it up with this hole and get it started on that second block that travels back and forth. So inside that channel, you're going to see that threaded rod, and it's going to be floating around in there. So once you set this block, these 2 blocks back up in there, you're going to have to line this up with the hole in there and start this by hand. Insert your block, holding that cable tight to the 2 blocks. Now I'm going to raise up or down on that threaded rod, try to get it in alignment with that back block. Now that I have it starting to grab that block, I'm going to by hand continue to roll that nut on the outside to retract this onto that threaded rod until my hole in that front block lines up with my hole in the outside of the channel. All the while maintaining pressure on those blocks so they don't come loose and the cable doesn't fall out. Now that I have my holes lined up top with my hole in my block underneath, I can go ahead and take that bolt that we took off in the beginning, slide that through, add my nylon lock nut to the bolt, and then using my 9/16 socket and open end wrench, I can go ahead and tighten that back down into place. Just till it's snug, you don't have to over torque it. From that point, as long as we had everything right where it needed to be, you should be able to now grab hold of your cable and start turning your nut on the outside of the frame rail that raises and lowers that cable. And you should see that it's working like it should now. You can go ahead and reattach your spare tire and raise it back up to the bottom of the frame rail there. When raising and lowering, once again, always make sure that when you get close to that frame rail, that you're using a hand tool or a crank handle to go ahead and tighten it up the rest of the way to the 20 to 25 foot-pounds of torque. If you tighten it up too much, you can end up in the same situation where you strip that block out on the inside on the worm gear, and the tire will end up wanting to drop back down and away from the tire carrier itself. And that's how you go ahead and you replace the inner workings of our Retract-A-Spare. If you ever have any questions, feel free to reach out to BAL customer service and we can walk you through the repair if needed.